Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy Tab 3.7 and the Nexus 7 2nd Gen. So, as you can see, I've got the Galaxy on the left, the Nexus 7 on the right. And one thing you'll notice right out of the gate is that they do not have similar form factors. The Nexus 7 favoring more of a e-reader-like form factor, in my opinion, with a lot more bezel on the top and bottom. Also somewhat ideal for holding in landscape. Believe it or not, when you're viewing a movie, it actually is quite comfortable, and I think that's part of the design. Also comfortable for e-reading. Whereas with the Galaxy Tab 3.7, we've got a design that's very reminiscent of what's found with the Galaxy S4, except we don't have any of those internals. Not that we'd really expect them at 200. However, with the Nexus 7, we do get some of those internals that we'd expect with something as high-end as the S4. And that's what I'm here to talk to all of you about today. So which tablet is right for you when you're shopping for a brand new 7-inch Android tablet? Well, that really comes down to exact use and needs. In my opinion, there's no question, in every single way, the Nexus 7 destroys the Galaxy Tab 3.7, and that's just because specifications. We're looking at the screens right now. You've got two completely different beasts, 1920 by 1200 here in the Nexus 7, 1024 by 600 here on the left with the Galaxy Tab 3. And that's just mind-boggling to think that they're even next to each other. And when I say next to each other, I don't mean physically, I mean in the price point scheme. The fact that this is a $229 tablet in the 16 gigabyte capacity, and this is a $200 tablet in the 8 gig capacity, really just about puts them on even footing. And both of them, of course, are going to go on sale. This is the newer device, the Nexus. It did release just this past week, so of course it is the brand new tablet of the bunch, but this tablet is not even a month old, meaning the Galaxy. So they're very comparable. Samsung does make the Nexus 10, so clearly they're no stranger to Nexus devices, but Asus still has the Nexus contract here for the 7-inch. And much like the first gen, they've done a very solid and even better job, in my opinion. So just on the screen right there, this IPS display destroys this screen. No question about that. Then with what we've got underneath, here we've got a Marvell dual-core 1.2 gigahertz chip. The Nexus 7's got a Snapdragon S4 Pro, which is really an S600 underclocked. So you're getting some of the higher-end hardware on the market, really basically the internals of the S4. That's why I made reference to it before inside here, accompanied by 2 gigs of RAM, 16 gigs of internal storage. Of course, with regard to software, 4.3 Jelly Bean out of the box and all the latest updates. You're not going to get that here with any of the Galaxy Tab devices, let alone the entry-level 7. Also, in terms of Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS, you're going to see better performance out of the Nexus, in my experience, between these two tablets. Both of them do have basically a very similar specification sheet when it comes to that lineup of the mundane expectations we generally have from the standard fare features that we expect from tablets these days. But in terms of cameras, both the front and rear facing on the Nexus also superior. Here we've only got a 1.3 megapixel camera and a 3 megapixel on the back, whereas here we're working with a 5 megapixel on the back, which is actually quite usable for those of you actually trying to shoot. I would say that you could argue the front-facing cameras are much closer, but still better quality here from Asus. And both manufacturers are big when it comes to Android tablets. Asus very successful, Samsung also successful, but there's no question the Nexus just really edges this out in every single way. The only thing I can give credit to on Samsung really is the form factor. I think some people will physically prefer the Galaxy form factor to the elongated Nexus. And by the way, this new elongated Nexus is a departure from the original Nexus form factor that we had in the first generation. But I happen to like it. It is thinner, lighter. This is also a very thin and light tablet. You can see the bezel of the Galaxy tablet a little bit thicker. It's a little bit higher up than what we see out of the 7, but a negligible difference, and it's made up for, of course, by the fact that it doesn't have this extra bezel, which I know some people hate. As I mentioned before, I actually happen to like the bezel on the Nexus 7. It's very functional considering. So what else do we have beyond the hardware, the sum of the parts? I've mentioned that also, not just in terms of hardware, software, also the Nexus 7 has the best of really both worlds. What it doesn't have is expandable storage. This tablet does. It has a micro SD card slot for expansion, and that kind of makes up for the fact that it only has 8 gigs of internal storage, but nothing makes up for the single gig of RAM and that Marvell chip. That's really, unfortunately, the bottom line. In my opinion, even the fact that you may be in love with TouchWiz and having all of the extra little widgets that it adds from the S Planner, even though you don't get the Note type features, because after all, those are reserved for the Note line, and that's why I'll always recommend the Note line over Samsung's traditional Galaxy lineup, because not only will you get better hardware, but you'll also get much better software. And Samsung really does make the best value-added experience, best overall experience in a tablet outside of what you'll find in a Nexus. Really, these do represent the two spectrums, the two different ends, in my opinion. Here you've got the pure Android experience, and here you have the best of the non-pure experience. Unfortunately, this is hampered by its low-end specifications. So if it had similar specifications to the Nexus 7, clearly this would be a much better comparison. But the reason I'm comparing these is because they're both 7-inch tablets, and they both are seated at roughly the same price point, as I mentioned earlier. So that's really the reason I think anyone's going to compare them. Now, the only other added value feature beyond software, like I just pulled up the calendar accidentally, is the infrared remote, something you don't have here in the Nexus 7. But I think that's another one of those features that many users can live without. In fact, most tablets don't have infrared remote controls. The only other one right now is the Xperia Tablet Z, which I do love. Great piece of hardware all around, even at its price point, which is starting to go down. But that's in the 10-inch category, so not applicable here. Sony, unfortunately, does not make a smaller form factor tablet yet. But let's hope we see something from them soon, because I think there's room for more competition. After all, that's why I'm only sharing this right now. I do plan to also compare the Nexus 7 to the Note 8, so look for that in the future. In terms of battery life, also very similar. You're looking at roughly anywhere from 6 to 8 hours with either of these. You can squeak out 10 with the Nexus 7, but that's, again, not using brightness all the way cranked up. That applies to both. Not using all the radios. If you're going to be doing not intensive, low voltage type stuff, basically, is my best way of putting it. Intensive stuff is going to eat up either of these batteries, but they're close in terms of specifications, again, on the battery sides of things. They're just not close in any other way. Again, the screen, processor, RAM, no NFC here. You do have NFC in the Nexus 7. That's something I personally enjoy because I have NFC enabled cameras and smartphones, so it's good, as well as computers. So it's good to have things that can communicate. It just, again, makes the device more flexible, something that is missing here. Now, in terms of just basic web browsing, let's open up Chrome. We don't need to take a tour. You do get a little more extra added value in the keyboards here. Here you've got a stock keyboard. If you want to replace that, you're going to go ahead and have to actually download other keyboards. But Samsung gives you some choices, but I'm not getting into that right now. Let's just go to a website, see how things load up. Pull up CNN. And we'll see if I can do this simultaneously. And I think that speaks volumes. I know we're almost at 9 minutes in, but I think everyone could see there how quickly this loaded up on the Nexus 7 as opposed to the Galaxy Tab 3, and that sums it up. And you can just see the fluidity in the scrolling. It's just not there on the Galaxy Tab 3. You can see it's just behind. And if I start doing some pinch to zoom action, there it fares a little better, but again, it just doesn't have that responsiveness. I'm going to try to time this exactly the same. Hopefully no one's getting ill. But that sums things up. Let me open another link here. Something decent, if there's ever anything decent anymore. There's really not. Wrong website, sorry folks. But I'll go to another website. How about that? Let's go to ESPN, something a little bit lighter, even though there's plenty of steroid talk. Did I miss something? Yes, I did. And here we go again. Loaded up mobile here. Well, they both loaded up mobile, so it still worked out for our intensive purposes. And again, you can see a very clear difference. And I think also the screen resolution is going to come up. I'll even bring a close shot here so we could see if you really notice a resolution difference here. Let me frame some text. I'm going to actually go back on both tablets to CNN and frame some text for you. And already I think you can see the resolution. About as close a comparison as I can give. And it may not end up really showing through here, but on camera. But there's no question, I can tell you right now, that the resolution and IPS display offered by the Nexus 7 is leaps and bounds beyond what you're going to find with the Galaxy Tab 3. So overall, like I said, through the course of this video, battery life is very similar. The overall performance of the devices are night and day, even though they're both operating on Jelly Bean. That has a lot to do with the processor. Overall hardware, much, much better in the Nexus 7. In terms of actual physical form factor, I do prefer the Nexus 7. It does have that soft touch rubber backing, which is definitely better to hold on to, keep a grip, than the plastic back offered by the Galaxy Tab 3. Audio performance on both, very solid. I think the speakers, believe it or not, are a little bit louder on the Galaxy Tab 3, but it's very, very close. And there are speakers on both sides of the Nexus. Really, again, going to reiterate the key differences here. Beyond the hardware, it really comes down to expandable storage existing in the Samsung, the infrared remote, and the software package. Beyond that, the Nexus 7 trounces the Galaxy Tab 3 in every way, as does the original Nexus 7, which, if you're interested in a Nexus device, comparing it to this, I definitely recommend taking a look at the first gen. If you are strictly, on a budget, then the Nexus 7, the original one, is definitely another good alternative to this. Even though you won't get that Samsung experience, you will get a quality product, a nice screen, nicer than this one, with better internal components. In fact, all of the manufacturers seem to be refreshing last year's hardware. Like Toshiba's introduced the 10-inch Prime tablet, or Pure, excuse me, not Prime, of course, that's Asus's business, but Pure, which is driven by a Tegra 3. So that shows you that push towards budget is leading them towards older hardware. And that's kind of where this falls into line. It kind of reminds me of Apple's approach that, they're going to make devices that are reminiscent of their phones. In fact, just bigger versions of their phones, and the hardware is also not going to be impressive. That's unfortunately what the Galaxy Tab 3 really speaks to. Unimpressive hardware in a very familiar package that makes you believe you're going to get something like you'd get out of your S3, 4, or Note 2, but then you're left wishing it had the performance of the Nexus 7, or of course the actual S4, 3, or Note 2. So I think that really sums things up as best as I possibly can. I wouldn't pick this as my first or second 7-inch tablet. This is the Nexus 7 is my current favorite in its form factor in the sub 10-inch. The Note 8 is the next best option, and that's among all tablets right now in terms of performance, pricing, and overall usability. The software package definitely more robust with Samsung. You get the physical buttons that don't eat into the actual screen real estate, but those are really minor things and not a reason that I would ever recommend a tablet that underperforms the Nexus 7 in every way. Even the cameras, as I mentioned, neither have great cameras, but the Nexus 7's front and rear cameras make the Samsung cameras look like they're from another generation. And that's because, quite frankly, these tablets are from different generations, even though they're running very similar software. And just to reiterate the software versions, we're dealing with 4.1.2 after multiple updates, and here we're dealing with 4.3. So a Jelly Bean world, yes, less fragmentation than a year ago. 50% of the market now is working under Jelly Bean, but clearly hardware is still a very big dynamic in the scope of things. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing for competition and range of price points, but Often I think people will get sold into the brand and marketing of Samsung and not pick something like the Nexus 7, which is why I'm doing this comparison today for all of you. So definitely, if you're on the fence, grab the Nexus 7, the new one, or even the old one if you want to save $50 or $75, depending on how good of a clearance liquidation sale they've got going on the discontinuation. But right now, where it stands, the Nexus 7 is still the tablet to beat, and this tablet really, I think, as in the Galaxy Tab 3 7-incher, won't really have a great market life until it gets down to about $150 and then sees $100 come possibly even Black Friday. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.